What are the nameless things that Gandalf says lurk far below the misty mountains? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we dive deep into the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's wider legendarium, as well as A Song of Ice and Fire and The Witcher. Welcome. For a brief and seemingly throwaway comment by Gandalf, his reference to the nameless things that hide deep under the misty mountains has gained a lot of attention over the years. Perhaps it's because, having mentioned it, Gandalf immediately shuts down talk on the subject, so we never know for sure what he was talking about. This is what he says, and the context here is him explaining to Aragorn, Gimli and Legolas what happened after he and the Balrog had fallen deep underground from the bridge of Khazad-dûm. We fought far under the living earth, where time is not counted. Ever he clutched me, and ever I hewed him, till at last he fled into dark tunnels. They were not made by Durin's folk, Gimli, son of Glóin. Far, far below the deepest delving of the dwarves, the world is gnawed by nameless things. Even Sauron knows them not. They are older than he. Now I have walked there, but I will bring no report to darken the light of day. In that despair, my enemy was my only hope, and I pursued him, clutching at his heel. Thus he brought me back at last to the secret ways of Khazad-dûm. Too well he knew them all. Ever up now we went, until we came to the endless stair. Aragorn, Gimli and Legolas evidently decide not to quiz Gandalf on this point, and he doesn't mention it again, which is probably fair given the context. The central part of that story was how Gandalf came back from death, and then they had a world to save. Esoteric questions about the nature of unknown beings who weren't an immediate threat wasn't exactly top of their concerns. But still, they must have wondered what those nameless things were. Luckily for us, there is perhaps another mention of them from even earlier in The Hobbit, and again beneath the misty mountains, while Bilbo is floundering around in the dark below Goblin Town, when Tolkien slips into the omniscient narrator voice to tell us of other things, more slimy than fish. Even in the tunnels and caves the goblins have made for themselves, there are other things living, unbeknownst to them, that have sneaked in from outside to lie up in the dark. Some of these caves, too, go back in their beginnings to ages before the goblins, who only widened them and joined them up with passages, and the original owners are still there in odd corners, slinking and nosing about. At which point Tolkien uses this as an introduction to tell us about Gollum, whose full backstory he had probably not worked through by that point. The importance of his ring as the One Ring definitely hadn't emerged while he was writing The Hobbit. But although Gollum had certainly sneaked in from outside and was slimy, slinking and nosing about, he didn't create those caves and tunnels in the first place. Other things did that. Nameless things. So, what can we learn from these two passing references to the nameless other things? Well, these nameless things are ancient, older even than Sauron, which is saying something, as Sauron is an immortal Maiar. He passed down into Arda soon after it was created, along with the Valar and other Maiar. They are also dark or evil, or something Gandalf doesn't want to dwell on. Just talking about them would darken the light of day, and they brought despair. Finally, they gnaw at the world. They have clearly retreated even deeper underground, away from the dwarves and goblins and whoever else may encroach on their space. They aren't there to conquer Middle-earth or control it or engage in its politics or anything like that. It's as if they exist above and beyond those petty concerns. Knowing Tolkien, the phrase gnawing at the world was probably at least partly inspired by the dragon gnawing at the root of the world tree in Norse mythology. And perhaps you were already shouting out that we know of at least two more of these kinds of anomalies in Tolkien's world. Tom Bombadil, he's not a dark or evil anomaly, of course, but he's always definitely an anomaly, and Ungoliant. Both seem to exist outside of the normal rules of Middle-earth, and both seem to pre-exist and not care about what is really going on in Middle-earth, unless drawn out to do so in Ungoliant's case. So perhaps we should consider them both in the same context as the nameless things. We'll come back to that. Because the idea that these creatures might predate Sauron provides a bit of a conundrum in itself. That's because, as we said, Sauron is a Maya, and therefore one of the Ainur, and this is what the very first sentence of the Silmarillion says. There was Eru, the one, who in Arda is called Iluvatar, and he made first the Ainur, the holy ones, that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made. So Sauron, along with all the rest of the Ainur, was made first and before everything else, which doesn't leave much space for nameless things to have existed before him. So what's going on? Well, perhaps Gandalf just meant that they entered into Middle-earth before Sauron, or perhaps this was simply that the elves who wrote the Silmarillion got it wrong, or simply didn't know about it. Both answers are a bit problematic, though, and the truth is that Tolkien deliberately didn't explain. Why? Well, when you think about it, perhaps the most defining characteristic of these nameless things is that they are nameless and mysterious. Not even in his letters or unpublished essays does Tolkien tell us more about them. He does say this, though. There is, of course, a clash between literary technique and the fascination of elaborating in detail an imaginary mythical age. As a story, I think it is good that there should be a lot of things unexplained, especially if an explanation actually exists, and I have perhaps, from this point of view, erred in trying to explain too much and give too much past history. Many readers have, for instance, rather stuck at the Council of Elrond. And even in a mythical age, there must be some enigmas, as there always are. Tom Bombadil is one, intentionally. So Tolkien believed that one of the things that makes a story good, or a world feel more real perhaps and intriguing, is for there to be things that are not explained and are enigmatic. Tom Bombadil is, he says, intentionally enigmatic. The nameless things are similarly so. The effect, I think, is for us to feel a bit disconcerted by the idea of these nameless things, ancient, deep and dark. They make Middle-earth a slightly scarier place precisely because we don't know exactly what they are, what they look like, or even what they are called. There's something quite Lovecraftian about the eldritch horror possibilities there, although it's probably more likely that Tolkien and Lovecraft shared a common influence in Lord Dunsany than that Tolkien was copying Lovecraft in any way. So Tolkien wanted them to be mysterious and unexplained. Is that all we can say, then? Thankfully, no, because there is a chance we have seen one of them, the Watcher in the Water, just outside Moria. This is what Gandalf says about that when Frodo asks him, "Something has crept or has been driven out of dark waters under the mountains. There are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world." He did not speak aloud his thought that whatever it was that dwelt in the lake, it had seized on Frodo first among all the company. The language echoes here are quite strong. Hidden, unnamed creatures living deep beneath the misty mountains, ancient and foul. Gandalf's reticence to talk about it also seems familiar, and there is no doubt that the Watcher in the Water is unlike any other creature we know of in Middle-earth. Its tentacles were luminous with fingers on them, and it had an apparent intelligence. Gandalf didn't even want to commit to whether it was one creature or many. It is horrifying and undoubtedly other. At which point, let's just be clear, nameless things is not a taxonomy of creatures. They could be all alike, or they could be all very different. Being nameless is just a descriptor, because the peoples of Middle-earth hadn't encountered them to name them. And the Watcher in the Water being named that by the dwarves when they encounter it does not preclude it from having been one of those creatures, and just being named when it crawled or was driven to the surface. Which is all rather wonderful by Tolkien, by hinting that we might have actually encountered one of these nameless things, and then making that encounter unexplained itself. Was it one creature or many? What did it want? He actually adds to the mystery of those other nameless things. We get to experience a hint of an ancient, horrifying, slimy, abnormal creature, and then move on. Gandalf, the wisest, oldest member of the Fellowship, is troubled by it and doesn't really want to talk about it. It leaves us unnerved and uncertain about what actually might be out there. And it makes Middle-earth a bigger, deeper, and more nuanced place. Tolkien's genius here was to make Middle-earth more complex by not explaining it, or even naming some of its most intriguing denizens. If you'd like to see more videos like this, diving deep into Tolkien's Legendarium, there's a playlist appearing now on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.